select gathering this evening, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Mahshid Turner, who will be known to many of you, perhaps all of you, both as the Muslim chaplain in the hospital, also one of our own PhD students, and also the wife of one of the members of staff in the School for Government and International Affairs, those of you that are interested in Islamic studies there. So we're delighted to have you talking to us about your PhD research this evening, which I know you've been labouring over with great love for a number of years, and we're looking forward to what you've Mahshid, we're in your hands.
Okay. So in this session, I will be talking about two Muslim thinkers from the 9th century who talked specifically about obviation, getting rid of sadness, the Arabic word being huzn. The first one is al-Kindi. He was born at the beginning of the 9th century in Basra, and he is recognized as father of Islamic philosophy. And he contributed to the translation movement, which had started before his birth, actually, which translated Greek scientific and philosophical texts into Arabic. He was so much influenced by this, and he benefited so much himself, that he did all he could to support that movement to make sure it continues. He openly admitted that he was influenced by Greek philosophy, and he said that to accept the truth from Greek philosophy, as long as it fitted in with the Quranic truths, there was no problem with that at all. So he says truth can be from any source. And he believed that reason is absolutely compatible with revelation. There's no incompatibility between them. So what was al-Kindi's metaphysics? He believed that everything in creation is in motion, and therefore everything's in moving, so the universe cannot be eternal. And time and space itself are also finite. So everything that we see in creation is transient, it's ephemeral, nothing is eternal in this creation. His ideas on the soul. Well, the Epicureans and the Stoics, they believe that all substances, including the soul, is made of matter. This is where al-Kindi was different. He believed that the essence of the soul is actually derived from the essence of God. Then it's not material. And so he believed that this purified soul, that's our aim, to purify our soul, can reflect God's attributes at the highest level. So what's happiness according to al-Kindi? And he believed that happiness is only obtainable through knowledge. Without knowing anything, without reasoning, we can't be happy. So knowledge is absolutely necessary for being able to discriminate between good and evil, and for living a virtuous life. And unhappiness, this is where the soul comes in, is because of the corruption of the soul. And we need the tool of knowledge in order to be able to cleanse our soul. And he says the natural state of human beings, our innate being, how we are meant to be, is to be good. So, to quote from him, he says, what is just is appropriate to his nature. What is evil is only an accident. So evil is an acquired habit. It's not something that's part of our nature. Now, how does he define sorrow? It's a psychological pain. In Arabic, alam nafsani, or literally translated as a sickness of the soul, occurs because of loss of an object of love or the missing of things desired. So it's to do with loss, either of things, material things, or people. And he describes sorrow with very negative vocabulary with words such as vice, pain, tyranny. And it's not our natural state, but an acquired evil habit. So happiness, we can obtain happiness through thinking logically and seeing the word for what it really is, rather than what the acquired habits that we've had and how we think it is. He makes a clear distinction between sensible and intelligible objects. And he says that everything in this world, in this kind of worldly material life, is transient, ephemeral, and mortal. So it's reasonable to derive what we love from the world of the intellect then, and not transient beings, because they're mortal, they're transient. We cannot get permanence for something which is transient. So, quote from him that ephemeral objects cannot be permanent. Then we are seeking from nature what is not in nature, and he who seeks what is not in nature seeks what is not existent. And whoever seeks what is not existent will be denied his quest. And whoever is denied his quest will be unhappy. Thus who desires transitory things, and that his acquisitions and loved objects be of them, will be unhappy. Talks about futility of sadness. He says, in this transitory nature of worldly life, this transitoriness is ongoing. So we get attached to one thing, it finishes. We get to attached to another thing, it finishes. So our sadness would be ongoing as well. Also, he reasons that two opposites cannot stay together. You can't have sorrow and happiness coexist in the soul at the same time. So which is the better one to choose? He says, with regard to the causes of sadness, it's either due not to loss of objects, but to our attitude. It's actually due to we think it's the loss of objects, but it's actually to our attitude towards them, not the loss itself. So we need to change our attitude through training the soul, and this is possible. It's because we are attached to the wrong habits. One can be drowned in immoral habits, thinking actually it's happiness, and we become to believe it. And he gives the examples of outlaws at his time during the 9th century and before then. These were outlaws who carried out absolutely monstrous brutalities. They actually enjoyed doing it as well. So they took their captives essentially for money and jewels and whatever they carried, but they actually enjoyed their monstrous act of chopping their hands off, chopping their heads off, putting them on sticks and so on. And when a time went that they didn't capture anybody, they missed it. So they became habituated to this act, brutal act. So he says, this is an extreme example. We're not like this normally, but it makes us examine ourselves to think to what kind of habits we have become attached to. We think it's normal and gives us happiness, that we actually is not right, it's not part of our innate being, and we need to get rid of. So these habits, he says, are not inherent in the nature of man. They are acquired, something that needs to be got rid of. Also, he says, we spent ages and ages, and this was happening in the 9th century, it's happening today, pampering our bodies. The whole media, television, everything's on emphasis is on the body, on the external. But how much time do we spend on seeing to our soul? Quote from al-Kindi, therefore straightening and healing the soul of its illnesses is much more required from us than remedying our bodies, since we are what we are through our souls, not through our bodies. The physical is common to everybody, but the animality of every living creature is in its soul. Our souls are personal to us, and the interests of our personality are more important for us than the interests of the things strange to us. Our bodies are tools through which the deeds of our souls are made manifest. Thus, remedying our souls is much more essential than remedying our tools. But who thinks in terms of their bodies as tools, you know? So, very relevant today as it was then. So he talks about sources of sorrow. He says either it's from our own action. If it is our own action, then we can do something about it. For example, if I've got a scab on my hand, if I keep picking it and it bleeds, I'll stop doing it, you know, I can do something about it. Or it's from the action of others. If it's from action of others, we should do everything we can to try and stop it, if it's in our power to do so. For example, I don't know, someone shouts at us and, you know, hates us, and maybe, you know, our approach would be in such a way, rather than being angry at them, our approach should be in such a way in order to stop that happening. But he acknowledges that it's not always possible to change other people's actions. So he offers, for that possibility, he offers a strategy. So in that case, the strategy to follow is, firstly, we shouldn't be sad before it has actually happened, because it's daft. It might even be dispelled before it gets to us. So being sad before it's happened is just silly. And during the occurrence of the sorrow, all efforts should be made to deal with that occurrence rather than waste time and energy on being sad. So all the time he's appealing to our reasoning, our logical thinking, to store these ideas, replace them with those negative ideas we have in our mind, to say that, you know, why being sorry is an obstacle because you're wasting your energy. Those tools, those energies should be used to actually dealing with the problem. So, if we can't fight the sorrow, he said, when we use all our tools, when we always use all our energy to actually address that problem, even if we can't deal with it, at least we should employ any device possible to shorten its duration. His description of sorrow is pretty negative, as we said. He describes it as terrible and unnatural disposition, and it must be got rid of. He describes it as the most miserable of all the miserables is he who is unable to push distress away from himself in whatever way he can. And he offers, therefore, 10 devices to dispel sorrow. He says that our thought perceptions need to be changed, denormalized. Al-Kindi says, soul needs to be cleansed of all habits. And these are the 10 devices. His first device is that to recall the things endured by us and others in the past, in order to come to the realization, just as those previous sorrows stopped, are no longer happening, the present grief will also come to an end. So, because of the ephemeral nature of this world, we can't claim, no one can claim that they didn't have sorrow. You know, up till now, they've always been happy. No, things have happened. And also other people who are walking around, they seem fine, but in their life they must have had sorrow as well. But they're still existing, they're still continuing. So sorrow, he says, is a universal condition. It happens to everyone. And he gives the story of Alexander, the Macedonian king. He was dying, and on his deathbed, he told his mother, because he knew how much she was attached to him. He told his mother, when I die, build a new city and invite all the people of the kingdom who have never experienced misfortune or sadness to the city, in order to commemorate my memory. So the day comes, Alexander, the Macedonian king, dies, and the mother just does that. She builds a city and invites everyone. But on the day, not a single person turns up. She goes crazy and she asks one of her advisors, what happened? Where's everybody? He says, if you remember, the criteria was people who have never experienced a single misfortune in their life. So, and nobody exists. And then she realized what her son was trying to tell her. It is a universal condition, it happens to everybody. You haven't been picked personally. How alien it most people feel who feel very sorry, they think, why me? Well, it's not just you. And that's a lesson the Macedonian king was trying to teach. So, the second way is to really internalize the fact that sorrow is by convention, not by nature. It is therefore something that we inflict on ourselves. And he gives example, people who had never had possessions are not sad. I've never had a Mustang, so I'm not sad now that I don't have it. So if you have it and you lose it, so just think of yourself in the situation that you never had it in the first place. And he likens this kind of sorrow to those devoid of mind. You know, it's crazy to be sad about ephemeral things. In his third device, he says that he argues that the transient nature of this world is one of generation and corruption, therefore it necessitates corruption. It's part of it, it needs it, this is the way it is. Therefore, wishing for something which is impossible is like wishing for something which is not existent. You're asking for something which is not existent. So, desiring something which is not existent, you're being deprived of your desire and you become sad. So in the first place, this is why I say it's craziness. Don't desire something which is non-existent. Then he says, after all, and you've got to think of it this way, things that we own are not ours, they are common property. We're not entitled to the things around us, actually. And the only thing we are entitled to, the only thing we do actually own is our soul. And that's the only loss that we should actually feel sorrowful about, because it's the most precious thing. And these possessions that are common to all are actually, the owner of all these possessions is actually God. God gives us things as a loan. He gives us, it's a gift from God to be looked after. So you can imagine if someone leaves a pet or a plant pot or a dog for us to look after, they're going on holiday, and we get really attached to them, and when they come back and they want it back, and we say, no, we don't want to give it back, and that's be so silly. So we have to think in the same terms that the things that are given to us is a gift from God. He gives it to us on a loan, and when he wants to, we should be prepared to give it back in as perfect condition as we can. So it's actually, he says, very unjust and ungrateful to be sorrowful if the lender, with a capital L, God, wishes to his loan to be returned. He says, actually, God can reclaim everything that he gives us. It's up to him. But the only thing he allows us to keep is the soul. And we should actually be grateful that the most precious thing, the soul, we're allowed to keep. And the seventh device, he says, look at the absurd and contradictory situation of not wanting to be sad on the one hand, and yet insisting on attaching ourselves to worldly possessions on the other. That's illogical. It turns us to everything. I don't want to be sad, but I'm going to, attach myself to something that will make me sad. So it just doesn't seem a logical way of thinking. So, and he also reasons that it's not the actual loss that makes us sad, but our perception. We need to just think logically. Another thing he gets from Socrates and his Greek ancestors is the idea of possessions. And he says, possess what you need for your survival. If you have a lot more, the more you have, the more difficult it is actually to detach from it. So why make your life difficult for yourself? In the eighth device, he says, even death, the greatest loss, the main thing that we fear, shouldn't be seen in a negative way. It's inherent in human nature. Human being is defined as a living, rational, mortal being. We are mortal. Given this, then, it is totally irrational to fear death, because we know from the beginning that we are mortal. And anyway, death, he says, is not at the end. It's the continuation of a journey to a better world. So death is not bad. What is bad is actually fear of death. The ninth way, al-Kindi reminds us that when we're faced with disaster, rather than focusing on what has been lost, we should focus on what remains. For example, simple example, if I get a cold sore, I'll forget about, oh, I've got my eyesight, I can hear, I've got my hair, I've got my hands, I can breathe. All attention goes on that cold sore and my day's ruined. So he says, but, you know, forget about, think about the things that you have rather than what you don't have. Again, following his Greek predecessors, he says, the less we have, the less we lose, hence the less likelihood of sadness. So, the last device, reduce your possessions. So al-Kindi then, it's the conclusion, a brief summary. He says sadness is a universal trait, that should be, but it's an acquired habit, and it's not inherent in human nature. So we must change our thought processes, we must change the way we think about things. And it's not actually loss, but our perception of the loss that makes us sad. So self-training is required to detach from sensory material things. So, and he points to the fact that illness of the soul is much, much more harmful than illnesses of the body. Now to the other Muslim thinker, Zaid al-Balkhi. He was born 50 years after al-Balkhi in the Persian province of Balkh, now part of present-day Afghanistan. He was a great physician and scholar in all fields, and he authored more than 60 books and manuscripts in a variety of disciplines. But unfortunately, similar to al-Kindi, most of al-Balkhi's work are lost too. The only religious work surviving is his manuscript of Sustenance for Bodies and Souls, which is located in the Ayasofia library in Istanbul. And the first part of that book is devoted to physical aspects of health, the sustenance of the body, and the second part to the sustenance of the soul. In the introduction to the sustenance of the soul, Balkhi points to the general obsession of physicians with physical illness and their lack of regard for the psychological aspects of illness, which can have a great impact on physical health actually. So he prioritizes the psychological illnesses. So what has he got in common with al-Kindi? He portrays the world as one of generation and corruption, similar to al-Kindi. Therefore, worries and anxieties are an inherent part of this life. And just as the body can be trained, so can the soul. For example, if someone wants to go climb Mount Everest, he can gradually train the body to be able to accept certain temperature. My fingers can touch the oven, you know, don't burn easily, it's not safe for my children, though I can tolerate heat on my fingers, I'll burn them that much. So we can train the body, just as we can train the body, we can also train the soul, but how many of us spend time and effort in training the soul? But he acknowledges that people differ in capacity to endure difficulties. And he says individuals should therefore get to know their capacity. So he's a little bit more understanding in capacity. We need to understand our capacity. If it's a situation we think we know that we're not be able to confront, if it's not advisable to do so, then don't go and confront it. And he acknowledges that in this transient world, one can't escape bodily afflictions. and that the soul can't always be in tranquility either. But, he says, the soul should be protected from both internal and external influences. He says, internally, we can desensitize the symptoms through opposite therapy. That's changing our thought processes by thinking exactly opposite those thoughts. And this is something that al-Ghazali, another Muslim thinker, adopted a few centuries later in the 11th century, which is that, you know, try and keep like a medicine cabinet in your mind with different potions or different tablet containers, if you like, but, you know, in your mind to think exactly opposite. For example, if you reacted badly towards a certain situation and your thoughts, remember those thoughts and keep a totally opposite thoughts in your medicine cabinet of your mind, ready for the next episode that will happen, and instead of the normal, your normal action that you're habituated to, use that medicine, if you like, spiritual medicine to deal with it. So it's ready, so you're not reacting spontaneously to those situations as you see. React exactly opposite to it. And externally, external things through an advisor or counselor. He provides a similar definition of sorrow as al-Kindī's. It says it's caused by loss of something one loves or is attached to. So material attachment or people. But he acknowledges that total obviation of sorrow is not possible in this world. So unlike al-Kindi, Balkhi's views on sorrow seem to be less negative, and he emphasizes that in this world it is quite natural to have feelings of sadness, but nevertheless agrees that they should be dispelled. He says that there are two kinds of sorrow. The first kind has identifiable cause, such as the loss of a loved one or possessions. And for this, internal strategies are required. But the second kind tends to happen suddenly and without any obvious or apparent cause. And this is related to the physical conditions of the body. This is in the 9th century that he made that distinction. For the internal strategies, that means those with a cause, due to loss, for example, Balkhi offers 7 strategies for changing those negative thought processes into positive ones. Now, his strategies are very much like al-Kindi's. His first strategy is to think logically and consider the physical harm that sadness can do to the body. So don't make more harm to your body than that's already happened. Quote from al-Balkhi: "The fact that a person feels sad and depressed for presumed loss is actually because he loves his body and soul and wants to please himself with what he failed to obtain or to stop the loss from happening. Destroying his health in agony over what has been lost would be akin to someone selling out his capital to gain some little profit." So being sorrowful, the situation is like kicking yourself even more, in other words. What's the point? His second thought mechanism is that see the world for what it is, internalize it for what it is. It is one of generation corruption. Don't, again, like al-Kindi, don't expect permanence for a material, transient, ephemeral world. His third thought mechanism is appealing, I think, to the manliness of people in this one. Accept to show that weakness, when confronted with misfortune, is worse than the misfortune itself. Don't show your weakness. It's being in that situation is weakness, and it's not a positive approach to it. If you show your weakness and are weak, you can't deal with it. His fourth mechanism, yeah, again, very similar. He likens those who lose their patience to to spineless cowards, while those who bear misfortune with patience and endurance, he praises as courageous heroes. So who do you want to choose to be, like a coward in this situation, or do you want to behave like a hero and deal with it? Again, like al-Kindi, al-Balkhi says, one's soul is the most precious thing that one possesses, and therefore it should be the center of attention and preservation. Move away from what is not, what is permanent, what you do, or what you can do something about your soul. His sixth mechanism is, in order to reduce the effect of a calamity, one should ponder the fact that it might have been a much more grievous and unbearable experience. Think of it, think of what you have left and think, thank God I've got this, it could have been a lot worse, rather than what the actual thing that you've lost. So he also says that the most precious thing, the soul has been spared, that's what you've got left, and be grateful rather than despair about it. And again, very similar to al-Kindi, your past sorrow eased, your present sorrow will ease as well. So there's no difference with this one. So concluding, Balkhi stresses the importance of a healthy balance between mind and body. He says that humankind's experience of psychological symptoms is more prevalent than bodily symptoms. And if such symptoms are not halted, they may lead to bodily illnesses. So the psychological illnesses are important to address because they can affect your bodily illnesses. And in order to preserve health of the soul, both external and internal approaches are needed. Externally, this means avoiding elements which may arouse one's emotions, so avoiding difficult situations which you can't handle. Internally, this means avoiding negative thinking, so change the way you think about things. So, Balkhi offers 7 thought mechanisms for the obviation of sorrow. And his approach is very much based on changing negative thought patterns into positive ones through thinking about things logically. And unlike al-Kindi, Balkhi makes direct reference to the Quran. Al-Kindi is more indirect in his references, but Balkhi makes direct references to the Quran to support some of his arguments. So Balkhi and al-Kindi can be argued are early contributors to the field of cognitive behaviour therapy. But what distinguishes Balkhi, arguably attributed to Emmett Kraepelin 10 centuries later, is that he offers 2 definitions of sorrow, one with a cause and another without an apparent cause. So in today's terminology, very much linked to reactive depression and endogenous depression.